What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Saturdays in the SEC, episode 82, week two of our 2023 SEC preview series. This week, we're going to talk in depth about Texas A&M and Florida. Couple teams that had disappointing seasons in 2022, but there's a lot of optimism around both of these teams for their future. We're going to kick it off with Texas A&M. Obviously, I think it's fair to say probably the most disappointing team in college football last year, the preseason number 6 team, and they just never got off the ground. It was, they got off to a rough start losing to Appalachian State, and then it was just kind of downhill from there. A team that should have been really good offensively was ranked 101st in the country. So they're definitely hoping for a lot better this year, and judging on paper and what they have returning, this team's got a ton of experience coming back, especially on the offensive skill position wise. But kind of just give me your early thoughts on Texas A&M, and do you think they're going to have a bounce back year this year?
I do think they're going to have a bounce back year. Obviously, it's not really hard to have a bounce back year from a 5-7 season. So, I mean, you win 6 games. I guess that's technically a bounce back if you want to call it that. But I think they're going to have a bounce back year. Like you said, the offensive weapons they're returning. They got Evan Stewart returning, Anai Smith, Moose Muhammad. And then you got Connor Wigman at quarterback, who's a sophomore this year, kind of took over the reins last year in the back half of the season. Produced some really good games, like when they beat LSU, and he was able to move the ball down the field. He can run a little bit. He gives you that ability. Kind of honestly just reminds me of a Nick Fitzgerald kind of when he was back at Ole Miss. He could throw. I think he's a little bit better thrower than Nick Fitzgerald, but he can hurt you with his legs big time if you're covering downfield and you're giving him some space and you don't have a guy spying, he can hurt you with his legs. So I'm excited to see what he can do. But a big thing is they lost A-Chain from last year. So he was a 1,000-yard rusher. He was the heartbeat of their team. They weren't fantastic, but he was the heartbeat. But they do got a lot of guys returning or guys that have played and started a lot of games at the offensive line. Trey Zunn, he had 11 starts last season. He's a sophomore. Cam Dewberry, he had 5 starts, and he had a knee injury last year. He had a start against LSU. Or excuse me, Bryce Foster was one that had the knee injury, but Cam Dewberry had 5 starts last season, started coming on later in the year, started progressing and worked his way into the rotation. Bryce Foster, he got hurt last year, but he was an all-SEC, all freshman, all-American, all-SEC freshman. His freshman season last year had 5 starts and then hurt his knee. They expect him to be back and fully ready to go. Then you got Layden Robinson, who's expected to start or expected to go to the draft, obviously, at the end of this year. He's a senior, but he plays at right guard, started every game last season. And then you got Reuben Fothery, the second. He started every game last season as well. Those are the 2 guys on Texas A&M's O-line that started every game last season. But they're also all juniors, sophomores or juniors, and then 1 senior. So they got a lot of younger guys that played last year, and that's why it wasn't kind of gelling and it wasn't working the way people were expecting it to, because they had the 2022 number 1 overall class. But those guys were freshmen last year. The leap from freshman year to sophomore year is unreal. I don't think people realize how much a whole offseason really does help prepare a player to get into better shape, to get bigger, and get the nutrition program. Obviously, you have the whole system under your belt now, but I don't think people realize how much a year really helps. So I think people were jumping the gun last year. I was shocked that they were preseason ranked number 6, to be honest with you. I think that's a more fair ranking this year. I think they have a better chance to win 9-10 games this year than they did last year. I never believed they were going to be a 5-7 team, but I didn't think they were going to win 10 games. I thought, maybe 7 or 8, but they do have a lot of guys returning on the offensive side of the ball that played a lot of reps and a lot of meaningful reps and are big impact players. So I guess the more the question is going to be on the defense, but I think they're still pretty solid on that side of the ball. What's your opinions on that?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, their secondary on defense, I think it's going to be one of their strengths. Obviously, it was the number 1 pass defense in the country last year.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was aided a little bit by the fact their run defense was terrible. It was last in the SEC, so I think teams ran the ball more on them typically. And they've got the guys this year. I will be shocked if that's not vastly improved. They've got McKinley Jackson, Walter Nolan, Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart, like a lot of those guys in that high-profile class. guys they expect to take steps forward and have even bigger roles this year. So there's no reason that their run defense should be that bad again. I expect them to take a big step forward. They return both linebackers, Edgerrin Cooper and Chris Russell, excuse me. So I think their defense should be really solid. I mean, the main thing last year was just offensively. I mentioned they were 101st in the country. Quarterback was an issue most of the year, and that's why I'm a lot higher on them this year, and a lot of people are, is because they have a quarterback they can believe in now. Connor Weidman showed a lot of promise, and the big thing with them, he's got weapons to throw to. I think Evan Stewart's going to emerge and be one of the best receivers in the SEC.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, dude is just absolutely raw. Anais Smith returning from injury, that's huge. And then Moose Muhammad.
He gave Bama trouble last year.
Yeah, I mean, so they've got three dudes on the outside, just mentioning those three. So if they can get the offensive line and some of those guys you mentioned taking steps forward, which they should be able to do, and you would expect that, if they can shore up the lines of scrimmage, their offensive line taking steps forward, and certainly their defensive line taking steps forward, if they can get those areas improved, there's no reason they shouldn't improve vastly on the 5-7 record. I mean, they lost 5 games last year by 6 points or less.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it wasn't like they were completely far off or just getting beat soundly in a lot of these games. They were in most of these games and could have won, but offensively, they just could never take a step forward.
And the games they won, they looked like they knew what they were doing. They looked like a football team you would expect to win 9 or 10 games. Like in the LSU game, I went back and watched it last night, and so that's why it's fresh on my mind. But Moose Muhammad went off in that game as well. Connor Wigman used his legs, and he picked that defense apart, honestly. They ran all over him. A-Chain had a really good game. The offensive line was gelling together. I'm excited to see where they are, but I'm really excited to see what Petrino does. And if every coach, especially early in the season, if they're a former coordinator turned head coach and they've been calling plays as head coach and they get a guy who's in there known for a play caller, whether it be defense or offense, the head coaches always say, yeah, I'm gonna give up play calling and I'm gonna let them do it. But then week 4 rolls around and midway through second quarter, you're down 2 possessions and you're like, no, I'm calling the plays now. So Jimbo says he's going to let Petrino call the plays, and he has full trust in him. He's been nothing but a great asset to the staff. He's doing well in recruiting. He's helping him with game planning and not necessarily game management, but how he wants to work drives throughout the games rather than what's different what Petrino wants to do and what Jimbo wants to do. So I'm excited to see how that relationship is going to work out. Obviously, they're both professionals. They're both really good coaches. They're not going to get in each other's way to hurt their chances of winning and progressing in their, coaching career, because I think that if Jimbo has another 5-7 season, they're going to pay him whatever the hell it is that they're going to pay him, and they're going to get him the hell out of there. That's what I think. So the pressure's on more this year because the expectation is necessary. You have to perform to the expectation. That's necessary this year, because if not, you can't have another season like last year because he's not going to last. And then you're going to have a wide portal hit from all the guys after their coach leaves, because everybody gets a free portal. They get to go to the portal if their coach leaves. So I'm just excited to see if Jimbo will really lay off and let Petrino take over the offense. And if he does do that, how much different is that offense going to look than it did last year?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that's one of the more interesting things, like with this team in the offseason, is that relationship, because a lot of people are expecting that to be some tension within that relationship with those two, personalities, like you said, Petrino being a former head coach and at the highest level. And then obviously he's a great offensive mind. And then Jimbo, we know, is kind of stuck in his ways on a lot of things and his philosophy. So is he really going to fully relinquish those duties and that trust onto Bobby Petrino? And so that dynamic is going to be really interesting to follow this year. And obviously that's one of the more interesting pieces of their offseason, because as you mentioned, the pressure's squarely on Jimbo this year. I mean, this feels like a make or break year. I mean, it feels like he certainly needs to win 8 or 9 games for sure. Yeah. He needs to be in that range, maybe better, if he can do that. But no, they can't afford to to only win 5 or 6 games, and there's no reason they should. I was looking at Phil Steele. He does the experience chart. They were outside the top 100 last year in experience because they had a lot, a
Right.
big recruiting class, a lot of freshmen, sophomores. But this year they vault all the way to number 30 in his experience chart. So they're one of the more experienced teams in the country, relatively speaking. So there's no reason that this team shouldn't be competing at the top of the SEC West. It's going to be an interesting schedule, which I'm fixing to pull up. I think it's critical that they get off to a good start. Pulling it up here. So week 2, obviously they have the Miami game, which coming off the Appalachian State loss last year, that was the game they bounced back and ended up winning when a lot of people thought they would lose it. So I think it's critical they get off to a good start. Obviously they host Auburn in week 4. So just kind of give me your thoughts as we go through this and kind of what you're expecting. I think it sets up pretty well for them to get off to a good start, but that week 2 game at Miami is going to be pretty critical for them.
That's what I'm thinking too. I've got them winning 4 of their first 5 and then losing at Alabama, but I have the Miami game. I have it win or lose. I really can't make my mind up yet, and the only reason being is because I was talking about the O-lineman earlier. They have a bunch of starts spread out to the guys. 2 of them got 5 starts last year. 2 of them had 11, and the other 2 started a lot of games or started every game. So the continuity might not be there. They might not be running like a well-oiled machine in the first 2-3 weeks. They got to figure each other out, figure how each other moves next to right beside them. You got to trust that guy, things like that when you're pulling stunts, doing whatever you're doing. So that's what I'm going to look for early in A&M to see how they're going to progress and how I really believe in them in the rest of the season. But so honestly, I think they're going to go 9-3. I have them losing to Miami. If I was to bet right now, I would say that Miami is going to win that game just because it's at Miami. So I got them losing to Miami. Then I have them losing to Alabama. And then I have them losing to Ole Miss at Ole Miss late in the season. I just think I'm big on Ole Miss. I like Lane Kiffin, but at Ole Miss late in the season, that's some trouble anytime. If you're going on the road to any conference game late in the season, it's always trouble. So I think that at best case scenario, they're 10-2. Maybe they beat Ole Miss and lose to Miami, or vice versa, beat Miami, lose to Ole Miss. But I think Alabama's going to get them. I don't think they're going to be able to get Alabama this year, and I think at best case scenario they're 10-2, worst case scenario 10-3.
Yeah, I mean, I tell you what, just
Maybe
kind
not
of
worst case scenario, but just if they're not 10-2, I think they're going to go 10 or 9-3.
I tell you what, just kind of going through the schedule and all, the part that really sticks out to me is that 4-week stretch from October 7th to November 4th. You got Alabama at home, at Tennessee, South Carolina at home, who's going to be solid, and then at Ole Miss. Man, that's a brutal 4-week stretch. Obviously a bye week in the middle there before South Carolina, so that'll be helpful there. But and then that's not even counting, a road trip to Baton Rouge the last week of the regular season. So this is this pretty fairly difficult. I mean, obviously getting Tennessee and South Carolina out of the East is a pretty tough draw. So, but yeah, I think they probably win 9 games. I think 10 with this schedule may be a little bit of a reach, like in the regular season. I don't know if they'll go 10-2, just because they've got a really tough road schedule. I mean, you look at Miami, even at Arkansas, at Tennessee, especially at Ole Miss, you mentioned, then at LSU. That's a really tough road slate. So I think 10 may be asking a little too much. I think they're talented enough to do it, but I think with that schedule, that'll be tough. But I think 9's doable. But he definitely needs to be at 8 or 9 for sure. Otherwise, it's fans are already on edge a little bit. I mean, I think the expectations obviously are high going into this year and should be, but if they don't get off to a good start too, because the back half's really tough, so it's critical they come out the gate, firing on all cylinders if they can.
Yeah, and I'm going to be honest. I'm high on A&M this year. I think they're going to finish second, at worst third in the SEC West. I really do. I don't know. Right now, I'm saying that Ole Miss gets them. My mind might change because they could go the first 6, 7 weeks of the season and start turning it on and figuring it out. But I don't know. I just think, I guess finishing third is what I have them right now in the SEC West, losing to Alabama and Ole Miss, obviously depending on how everybody else shapes out. But I'm high on them. I think that Jimbo's, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, he had that 9-1 season in the COVID year, and he really just hasn't got back to that standard of play since the 2020 season. So I think this year the things are going right around there. You're not really hearing any negative media coming out of there like we have the past few years. He's kind of just been throwing gasoline on his own fire. So I think this year is the year that we're going to see Texas A&M take that next step. I don't think they're going to be in the college football playoff, but I think we're going to get the Texas A&M that's going to be here for the next few years, and I think they're going to be a legit contender in the coming years. And I think this year's laying they're going to start knocking on the door and making people aware of what they really can do. Because Connor Wegman, he's good, man. He's a sophomore, and the dude is an absolute baller. He's going to be one of the top quarterbacks in the SEC when it's all said and done this year. He's going to be probably the name in the SEC when it comes to quarterbacks next season. I'm telling you, this guy is a baller. The running back room's kind of questionable. They're going to have to make a name for themselves, but the guy that's running the offense, that's running the show, I've got full confidence in him, and I'm going to be watching him as often as I can.
Yeah, I mean, I think too that's what has really even raised the expectations even more, because you feel much better about their quarterback situation going into this year. You know, obviously, true freshman last year was asking a lot, trying to win the job early on. But when he got his opportunity, I was really impressed, and I thought that Ole Miss game that they won was probably his best performance, and that really, in my eyes, was great momentum heading into this year. And then obviously pulling off the upset against LSU. So they got a couple key wins there. But yeah, I was just really high on his play, and the main thing too is he's got those receivers to throw to. I can't wait to watch him and Evan Stewart. I think that's going to be one of the top connections in the SEC this year. And then we mentioned some of the other guys they have with Moose Muhammad and Nias Smith. I think that's going to help in the return game as well. He's big in that area. Getting him back fully healthy will be huge for this offense. So, yeah, they definitely won't be 100th in total offense this year. I expect them to be. No, I expect them to be up in the top, 20, 30 at least. But yeah, as we mentioned, the offensive line taking a step forward is going to be huge for them. Some of the running backs are inexperienced but talented. Le'Veon Moss, Reuben Owens, the 5-star freshman. I think he's going to be a really solid contributor this year, and he's coming into a situation where he can contribute early. Amari Daniels is in that running back room as well. So some of those guys don't have much experience, but I think the talent's there. If they can get that offensive line taking a step forward, and then with the quarterback and receivers they have, that they should take a huge leap this year. But I'm like you. I think they're going to be right there in the mix in the West, though. They certainly have the capability and the talent to do it. There's no reason this program shouldn't be a perennial top 10 team. They have everything you need, the support, the NIL dollars, the facilities. I mean, they have everything you need to compete, and there's no reason they can't do what Alabama or Georgia or LSU is able to do. This is a program that should be competing at the top of the SEC in the country every year because they have the resources to do it.
100%. I'm right there with you, and I think this year they do it. I don't think they win the SEC, but I think they're going to be the games that the teams like Alabama are when they're towards the end of the season. And I know that they're playing them in October, but when it gets down towards the end of the season, they're going to be watching these other games of who they're playing against, biting their nails like, come on, come on, I need you to win. I need you to help me out here, or I need you to lose, vice versa, whatever it is. But they're going to be biting their nails watching these A&M games later in the season because it might have something to do with if their final say in the SEC tournament championship or not.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned that too. A&M's they played Alabama great the last 2 years. Obviously,
Yeah,
beat them in 2021. Almost beat them last year. So I mean, they know they can beat Alabama. They and play with them. I feel like they feel even better about it this year because they have a better team than they have had the last 2 years. So I mean, this is a team that should be able to compete even better than those teams. Um, so obviously their confidence is going to be high getting that game back at home. Obviously, I think that's going to be one of the games of the year in the SEC. Going to go a long way in deciding the SEC West. So yeah, I think they're in the top three for sure. Like you said, I wouldn't pick them to win the West, but I think I have them third. But I could see them being second as well because I mean we feel good about that game at LSU. Like that's a game that obviously they can win. They proved it last year by beating them. So yeah, it's gonna be super interesting. I mean, the SEC West at the top is gonna be a lot of fun to watch this year because you've got, quite a few playoff and championship caliber teams at the top there.
100%. And then the thing about it is, this is the last year that only one of those types of teams is going to make it. You know, rarely is it two teams from the same division in the conference. I don't know that it's ever been. I could be wrong, but I don't know that it's ever been two of the same teams from the same division in the playoffs. So this is the last year of that, and then it's going to expand to the 12. But who are you? Who are you thinking has a chance to upset Texas A&M that we're not expecting to, that we didn't, neither one of us picked? I think honestly it's Arkansas, because Arkansas's got them at home. They got KJ Jefferson and Rocket Sanders. I think that's the game that Texas A&M as a fan you circle and you're like, we've got to be on our P's and Q's this game or it could get ugly.
Yeah, and two, that game's at Jerry World. It's a neutral
Oh, that's
site
right. That's right. I forgot about
venue.
that.
So obviously they always play that game in September, typically late September. It's early on in the SEC slate. I agree with you though. A&M pulled that game off last year, and I thought Arkansas was the
Yeah.
better team.
I lost some money on that
Um,
game.
so yeah, I agree with you, and that's always a close game too. Those teams are really fun to watch go at it. Um, like I said, it always seems like a really kind of classic game between those two. So I agree with you. That's a tough one too. And where it's at in the schedule, it's after your SEC opener against Auburn, and it's a week before the Alabama game too. So that's always a tricky part, I feel like, for them because it's typically around the Alabama game,
Yeah.
usually before. Um, so you've got that game in Jerry World away from Kyle Field, and then right after that, I mentioned Alabama, and then you go at Tennessee. So that kind of starts the gauntlet of the meat of their SEC schedule. So I agree, that's kind of a trap game, and I agree with the Ole Miss there in early November. That's going to be a tricky game as well. And to be honest, South Carolina, like that game's at home, but that's not going to be easy out either. I mean, the expectations are pretty high for South Carolina this year based on what they did a year ago and returning some of the guys that they are. So, yeah, there's not many like gimme wins on the schedule, even for a team like A&M as talented as they are. There's really not a cakewalk on that SEC schedule. So, but I expect them to be right in the mix. I think they're going to be close to the top of the West. And I feel like we say this every year, but I just feel like over time the SEC keeps getting more and more interesting. Like every year
100%.
I go, man, I can't, man, this year I'm as excited as ever to see how the SEC races shake out in both divisions, especially the West this year. And then here I am in 2023. I'm like, man, I'm as fired up as ever to see how this shakes out. So, and then obviously we know what we're looking ahead to in 2024. So we know we're going to be saying that next year with divisions going away. So, I have a feeling that's going to be a trend that's going to continue. So, but no, I'm really excited to see how this shakes out, but, I'm not exactly sure what their over under is, for this year, but, I would say it's probably 8.5 or 9.
Yeah.
I would
That's
guess
what I would think.
probably. So, but yeah, expect a nice bounce back from A&M this year. If not, something's gone wrong for
They're going to
sure.
have a new coach if not.
Yeah. I mean, I think definitely if they only win 5 or 6 games
Yeah.
for sure. But I would be shocked if that's the case. So I just think they're going to be better than that. So, um, but I'm really interested to see how it plays out. Like I said, the West is going to be fascinating this year. But kind of flipping over to the East a little bit, um, done a deep dive into this team. Billy Napier was on the podium today. Um, really, I'm very um, positive and very encouraged by the direction that he has Florida going in. I think a lot of people are feeling that way. Kind of give me your thoughts on the way Florida's trending, not only for 2023, but beyond that.
I like the way they're going for 2023. They've gone out and they've got some transfer guys that's played some big roles. Like at offensive line, they got the Micah Mazkua guy, and they got Keontae Goodwin from Kentucky. They're both expected to start on the offensive line. Micah Mazuka had 11 starts at Baylor last year. And then the Richie Leonard, he had played 11 games last year, but only got one start. Again, I mean, I know I say this with every team. I start out with the O line, but that's where it starts it starts in the trenches. No matter where you play, no matter who you're playing against, no matter what level it is, it starts in the trenches. You got to have people there. I think obviously in the recruiting trail we've talked about the last few weeks, Napier's putting in work in the recruiting trail. He's getting guys there that he needs to build the program. But I think this year it's still going to be another rough patch. I think they're going to have to give him one more year. I mean, they only really returned one receiver from last year, Ricky Pearsall, which is a good guy to have back for sure. If you're going to return anybody, you'd want it to be him. But they don't really return anybody else at the wide receiver at the skill position that's played a lot of reps for Florida. I mean, they got Caleb Douglas, who's expected to play start, and Marcus Burke, who's also expected to start. And then you got Graham Mertz, who's he's no Joe Burrow. It's not like Joe Burrow's transferring in or Jaden Daniels is transferring in. I mean, this is Graham Mertz. He played quarterback for Wisconsin. Wisconsin's not known for producing quarterbacks. Just they're running back school and offensive line. That's about it. So I think this year, I think attitude-wise and leadership and demeanor, I think it's going to be a lot different team on the field. Whether the outcomes of the game are different or not, I don't know. I think they're going to have a rough year again, but I think that the product on the field is going to look a lot better. I think the guys are going to be in the right positions. They're going to be there to make the plays. I just don't think I don't think they have the depth to hang with these guys. They got a pretty tough schedule. I mean, they go to Kentucky, to South Carolina, to LSU, to Missouri, and they're playing Utah to open up the season, and Cam Rising's coming back for Utah. So that's going to be a really, really tough game out of the gate. Then you got McNeese week 2. All right, let's take a breath. Then you right back to freaking SEC play, and you got Tennessee. So their first 3 weeks this season, might be the toughest in the SEC, honestly. So I think starting out 2-1 or 1-2, excuse me, that kind of puts a nasty taste in your mouth, and it can either make the season go really bad really quick, or they can maybe right the wrong. But I just don't see them getting back, in the win column often after that McNeese game and after Charlotte, because the games, the easier teams, quote unquote, that you say they would play in the SEC, they play them on the road. So I just think depth wise, he just doesn't have those guys in there yet this year. I think you give them one more year. I think at best they finish 5-7, but I think it's about 4 or 5 wins. And I'm not gonna lie, I went to the casino last weekend, went down to the sports book. We played a little golf the next day, but they had a little deal. If you spend $50 in the sports book, you get to play $100 and something golf course for $30. So at worst, if you lose your sports bet, you're paying it for you're playing a nice course for $80. So we did it. And all my buddies that was with me, they was taking like live betting baseball and stuff. They all won, props to them. But I was like, nah, I'm taking a futures bet. So I took futures bet. I took the under 5.5 wins for Florida. So I need them to have 5 or less. Honestly, that's what we've been looking into this. We decided last week is what we're going to do. So I was looking into it a little bit, and I felt confidence in that. I don't think they're going to look and play like a 5-7-4 or 5-7-4-8 team, but I just think the product and the outcome of the games, I don't think they've quite got I don't think they quite match up with the people they're going to square up with this year. I think it's just going to be another tough year that Florida fans are going to have to deal with in football.
Yeah, it's I like you said, I think they're going to be better this year. I mean, I think their roster's in a better place for sure. I just think you're not going to see them take a step in the win column perspective, and obviously that's all that anybody cares about at the end of the day.
Right.
It's about wins and losses. But I just think, like you mentioned, with this schedule, it's going to be tough to take a step forward in the win loss column. I mean, they went 6-6 in the regular season last year. They had a ton of opt outs in the bowl game. They were well undermanned, got absolutely blitzed by Oregon State. So to finish 6-7, they've had they have back to back losing seasons for the first time since the 70s, I believe.
Yeah.
So if they have a losing season this year, it'll be the first time since the 50s, I believe, or so. So this is very rare territory for them. But I am very encouraged. I listened to his press conference today at SEC Media Days. He's got a quiet confidence about his team. I think he likes the mindset, a good mix of veterans that they brought out of the transfer portal, but also some young guys as well. But like you said, I just don't think they have what they need yet, obviously. But I wouldn't be surprised if they pull off a game or two, maybe they're not supposed to. I could see them getting to 6. I think they're probably 5-7, 6-6. To be honest with you, I could see them pulling off one. Maybe they're not supposed to. A game like Arkansas at home, maybe they're able to get. Vandy at home, that's a game they should get. And you mentioned McNeese and Charlotte.
I think they're
Maybe
going to beat Missouri too.
yeah, maybe at Missouri. So, but yeah, they're out of conference, obviously. At Utah to start, and then hosting Florida State to end it. That's one of the tougher
Brutal.
non-conferences anybody has. Probably the toughest because I mean that's two top 15 caliber teams. So one's on the road on a Thursday night to kick off the season. By the way, I'm very happy that's a standalone game this year.
Oh yeah.
On a Thursday night, we've been really needing a good Thursday night early kickoff kind of game. We've had some okay ones, but not really one that really gets the juices flowing, in my opinion. This one gets the juices flowing though. So I'm very excited. This is a standalone Pac-12 SEC game. So props to them for putting that Thursday night, getting a good appetizer before Saturday gets here. I like how this isn't one of our best week ones we've ever had, but I do like how they did spread them out. You've got this game on Thursday, got a couple good ones on Saturday, and then that LSU Florida State game on Monday night. So I do like how they spread that out a little bit. But as I mentioned, one of the tougher non-conference schedules in the country. And then, like you mentioned, Tennessee week 3. And then maybe some of their more winnable SEC games are on the road in South Carolina, Kentucky, even at Missouri a little bit. So, this is a tough draw for Florida. I think they're going to be improved. I just don't think you're going to see it much on the win-loss column.
Right.
But I do think he's very happy with the way his program's trending. Obviously, we've talked about over the last month or two how much they've shot up in the recruiting rankings for 2024. They're in the top 5 currently. So, and they're able to get that kind of jump without really having the results yet. That says a lot. Guys are really buying in about being the change of Florida football. So, I am very excited about their future. It's just not going to be quite time yet. But as I mentioned, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't pull off a game that maybe they shouldn't. And kind of getting into their personnel a little bit, you discussed having Ricky Pearsall back's big. Had a really nice year last year, but they're very inexperienced, at the other receiver spots. But really, where their offensive focus is going to be is that running back room. Montrell Johnson, Trevor Etienne, Cam Carroll, like they've got a really, really good stable of running backs. And the guys that they recruit out of the portal, you mentioned Keontae Goodwin, Damian George from Alabama. Some of the guys they were able to get, they really specialize in run block and not as much pass protection. And I do expect this Florida team to play a lot more complementary football this year. I think their defense is going to take a step forward with Austin Armstrong being there now. They return some really good talent. Jason Marshall, Shamar James, and then they got Cam Jackson, a big nose tackle from Memphis that they're extremely high on, and then Caleb Burks as well, a transfer defensive tackle from Louisville. So they've got some good pieces there on defense to be a lot better. I think they've got to be a lot better on the turnover margin this year, forcing a few more turnovers, and their run defense has got to be a lot better. But I do think with Graham Mertz there, like you said, kind of an average quarterback. But what really hurt their offense a year ago is that they would have games where Anthony Richardson could just take over, like the Utah win. The game against Tennessee, that's a game they really shouldn't have been in, but he kept them in the game and kept scoring and giving them a chance. But
they ran the ball really well that game too.
Yeah, I just don't think they play complementary football very often because their offense would be on sometimes and it would be off sometimes, and then their defense really struggled a lot. So I expect them to be a lot better, complementing each other this year. With those running backs, time of possession, I think it's going to be a big thing for them. Get more stops on defense, which I expect them to get because they underachieved on defense last year. So I think those things will help them. But like you mentioned, the schedule is going to make that tough, though.
100%. The games that I have them winning, I haven't beaten McNeese, I haven't beaten Charlotte, I haven't beaten Vandy, and I haven't beaten Missouri. I think you're right that I have them 4-8, 5-7 maybe. I think they could beat potentially Kentucky. I just think Kentucky at home, they're a tough team. They run the ball extremely well. And then I think they could potentially beat South Carolina, but again, that's on the road. We talked about just a little bit ago, Shane Beamer and company is expected to take off this year and be much better than the South Carolina in the last 3 or 4 years. So I'm excited to see where they are again, just to see, because last year it just felt like watching Florida. It was like it definitely wasn't the Florida we were used to. It was just the feel was different. I don't know. It wasn't the Florida of the smash mouth guys they're going out there knowing they're better than everybody. I don't know. It's just the swagger they play with. It's like they didn't have any. I don't know. I'm excited to see what Napier's doing there. I'm ready to see the content on the field. But again, I think you're right. And I don't think it's going to translate into the win-loss column, but I definitely think it's going to translate when you're watching the game and seeing how the guys are playing and the buy-in that they have and the attitude that they're playing with. That makes a big difference. And again, everybody wants to be the team that wins the national championship and starts the run, but you've got to take pride in being the group that starts that run, that starts the culture that is needed to have them make those runs. Like the first class for Nick Saban, the first 2 classes, the second class ended up winning the national championship, but they were the ones who laid the foundation, and they took pride in laying that foundation. The guys like Roquan Smith at Georgia under Kirby Smart, he didn't win a national championship. He played in one, but they took pride in laying that foundation and building the foundation and what is Georgia football and Alabama football, or whichever team is going to be. So I think that the way you're talking about Napier talking about his guys, I think that these guys are taking pride in that, and they're going to go out there and give everything they got to start help build this thing and turn it into the trajectory that Florida football is used to being in.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're going to lay that foundation this year just by their attitude. I was just really impressed with Billy Napier today at SEC Media Days, and I wanted to get into that a little bit and kind of why I believe in him and why I think he's the guy to turn this around for Florida. This guy's super process oriented. He's super organized. I mean, this is a guy, obviously, you can tell he's coached under Nick Saban, under Dabo Swinney, like some of the best coaches the sports scene. I mean, just very organized guy. I think he's got the right mindset. I think you can already see that his guys are buying in to what he's selling. And then, so like you said, I think they are going to take a step forward this year, whether the win-loss column shows that or not. But I do think they're definitely trending in the right direction. 2024 class, obviously, like you have to have the buy-in, but where you really see the trajectory of a program is on the recruiting trail. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if you're not seeing it on the recruiting trail yet, odds are it's not going to happen quite yet. Like when you see a team start shooting up the recruiting rankings and getting, these 4 and 5 star guys that they should get, that's when you really see the progress and the momentum, you know, be made. Um, and then, this year already, they had a good recruiting class last year as well, in the top 10 or 15. So he's starting to stack those recruiting classes on top of one another. It's going to take some time, but I'm very confident in the direction that Florida's headed in. Um, so I think he's going to be competing at the top of the SEC sooner rather than later. But man, it's a tough ask though. There's so many quality coaches and quality teams in the SEC. I mean, you're fixing to add 2 more great programs with Texas and Oklahoma, and as we've said before, not everybody can win 9 or 10 games. I mean, there's some really good teams that may not win 9 or 10. So, man, it's just I'm just so impressed with the quality of programs, the quality of coaches in the league right now. I think it's as good as it's ever been. I think it's only going to get better. So I'm excited for the future of the league. As we go into the future with the 12-team playoff and things like that, no divisions. Going to be super interesting, man. The future of the SEC football is really bright, and I think Billy Napier will be right in the mix on that.
I agree 100%. He's one of the best top 100 coaches in college football. He's probably a top 50 coach in college football right now. He's a young guy. He's doing things the right way. Florida's going to get back corrected in the next few years. I mean, there's no doubt about it. As long as he's there, Florida's going to get back to being what Florida's expected to be. But what were some of your takeaways today from hearing Nick Saban talk at SEC Media Days? Some of the things he discussed, some of the things he pinpointed and focused on. What were some of the takeaways you had?
Yeah, I will say today I feel like I saw him different than maybe I've seen him before. I think he had a quiet confidence about his team. I think he wasn't wanting to oversell it though. But I think internally, I think he feels good about the team that he has. He bragged a lot about Tommy Rees,
Mm-hmm.
Kevin Steele. He obviously got a lot of questions asked about Tommy Rees. He's very complimentary of him, bright young coach, builds relationships with his players. Um, obviously he's a great mind. Offensively, he really understands the game. He played the quarterback position. Even though he's young, he's got a good bit of experience already from being at Notre Dame. So he was very complimentary of Tommy Rees. But like I said, I just think he had a quiet confidence, but not wanting to oversell it. Not really, obviously the expectations high, but not trying to put even more pressure on it. Obviously, just hearing from some of the players speak too, I think there's a mentality that obviously like people are crazy to say, but people are kind of counting them out a little bit, like kind of writing them off in the sense of saying that Alabama's on the way down. You know what I mean? Like this is kind of the start of them maybe tailing off a little bit, maybe not being as dominant as they've been here the
It's
last
about all that's
decade
dominating the
plus.
media right now about Alabama is that they're falling off and they're no longer the Alabama of the past. That's all I've heard, and I'm like,
Yeah.
y'all are absurd.
Yeah, I just think there's a real hunger from the players like Kool-Aid McKinstry, saying like guys are constantly in the facility, like these young guys are hungry, like everybody's ready to, um, kind of show everyone that, hey, like we're still here, like we're still kind of the gold standard of college football. And that's kind of what JC Latham, he was kind of, echoing today as well. He was actually wearing a necklace with TK
Yeah, I
on it,
saw
which
that.
stands for
Trench
Trench
King.
Kings. So,
Yeah.
um, I think, and that's really the whole reason Nick Saban went out and hired Tommy Rees and Kevin Steele. I think he wants to get back to his roots. And I think some of the most interesting comments he made today were actually off the stage on the SEC network set with Greg McElroy and some of the other commentators, and saying that last year obviously got a lot of questions about, Bryce Young being gone, Will Anderson being gone. Um, And I think he said and kind of shed some light on how they made a little bit of a mistake. He said, when you got a guy like Bryce Young and even Will Anderson, you typically you continue to put more and more on those guys' plates because they're so elite and they just can win you games, and they're just different than a lot of other guys that you have come through the program, that it kind of takes away from maybe some of the other guys on the team.
Right.
And Alabama, just last year we saw them undisciplined with penalties and just not playing as complimentary football. I mentioned that with Florida a minute ago, but Alabama didn't have as many turnovers on defense. When they were ahead in games, the games that you go back and look at the games that they lost against Tennessee and LSU, they were leading in the fourth quarter. They had a score lead in the fourth quarter of both of those games. And other Alabama teams probably would have been able to run the ball and what Saban says, take the air out of the ball late in the fourth quarter. And twice they failed to do that. And some other games they end up winning, they failed to do that as well. So I think, as good as Bryce Young was, that style doesn't really fit the way Alabama's used to playing. Alabama going empty a lot on offense. It's not really the style they play, but you got a guy like Bryce Young, you want to put the ball in his hands as much as possible. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world, but at the same time, I just don't think the styles complemented each other as well as they have in the past. And that's exactly why he made these coordinator hires, because I think he wants to go back to his roots, so to speak, because he looks across state lines and sees what Kirby Smart's doing in Athens, taking his blueprint and going over there and winning back-to-back championships, even though it's a little bit differently. I mean, the offense is more open now. I mean, we're 10 years removed from some of those early Alabama teams, so it's not going to be exactly the same. But in an essence, at its core, that's what's won Alabama 6 national titles.
Yep.
Kind of, for the most part, the 2020 team was pretty wide open. It was unique in that way, but at its core, you got to play complementary football.
Do you feel like that 2020 team? Because you're right. I mean, you had Derrick Henry that just dominated around the ball. You had Mark Ingram, obviously, on the first one. Eddie Lacy. I mean, I can just go on and on about the guys that carried y'all to championships. But then you got the 2020 season, and it was the quarterback and wide receiver play that really carried y'all to the national championship. I mean, y'all ran the ball, obviously, here and there, but it was downfield attack after downfield attack after downfield attack. I mean, there's wide receiver ones. All 4 of them are wide receiver ones. So I feel like, and the way that Alabama won those games was just majority of them were just beat downs, and nobody could keep up with them. And it wasn't even a prayer. Everybody knew Alabama was going to win those games. So do you feel like after that season that Saban and the staff kind of not forced it to be that way, but we're like, well, it works like this. Obviously, we just dominated like this. Let's keep it this way. Do you think they got away from what made them great forever? Do you think they got away from that on accident? Or do you think that they did it, accidentally pushed it away too much, trying to open up to the new scheme that they have been running the last few years? Because it worked so well that one season.
Yeah, I do think, to me, when it really started to shift, I think, is when Tua Tagovailoa started. I mean, obviously the 2017 title game, he comes in, relieves Jalen Hurts, obviously leads Alabama to championship in the second half. And then the following year, you had Tua for 2 years and all those receivers, and Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs and Waddle and Smitty, and just it was so dominant. And I think it was right at the right time. And obviously they won the 17 title. They made the championship in 18. And obviously LSU kind of happened in 19. Had some injuries with Tua and stuff. So I think it worked for a bit. And obviously they've still had great success. But I think, you've had such great quarterbacks that you want to keep the ball in their hands as much. You've had, I mentioned Tua, even going back to Jalen, but Mac Jones, obviously, and then Bryce. So you had so many weapons as well, too. So I do think they got maybe a little further away from that than they wanted to. And I think that's why you're seeing them shift back now, because I think the personnel calls for them to shift more back this way as well. Because you're not, this year, I think they're going to have solid quarterback play no matter who it is, but it's not going to be on that level that it has. But Alabama's won with this quality of quarterback numerous times. I mean, Blake Sims took them to the college football playoff. Jake Coker won a title. I mean, A.J. McCarron wasn't the flat. Yeah, I mean, 1-2 wasn't the flashiest guy, but just they won them playing complimentary football. I know it's kind of been the theme of this podcast here, but it's true. And I think you're going to see that's why you're seeing them shift back to this, not only because they see what Georgia's doing and how well they've done it, being balanced and being more physical up front, but when you go empty more often and you're in shotgun more often, you're not naturally as physical up front as you have been when you're maybe running the ball a little bit more. So I think you're seeing them shift more back to that. I think the personnel calls for it, and I think obviously Georgia doing what they've done plays a big factor in that as well. But I think you're seeing Saban go back to more of the core of what made them so great.
100%. Anything else you want to do?
But I think overall, I was very interested in what he had to say, just as far as the quiet confidence kind of caught me a little bit. He made a funny analogy as well with the quarterback battle. Said, hey, we got 3 guys battling for the job. He said he actually compared it to baking a cake. His grandma used to bake cakes, and he was like, he said, as a kid, I would stand by the oven waiting on the cakes to be done. And his grandma would tell him, like, you can't rush it. If you rush it, it's not going to be done correctly. It's going to be all mushy, and it's not going to be, what it's supposed to. And that's what he was saying with the quarterback battle. Like, hey, we can't rush this. We got to give this time to play out, and we're going to give it the proper time and see who separates themselves,
right?
And who wins the team. And I thought one of the more key comments he made on the quarterback battle is he's like, the guys are trying to make plays that win games, but he said you've got to make the plays first that don't lose us the game before you can make the plays that win us the game. And that's been the biggest issue really with Jalen Milroe and Ty Simpson going back to last year and in spring a little bit is
home run ball.
Well, they just, like I said, they were making the plays that were losing us games or hurting our offense rather than they could make plays that would win us games too, but they were making plays that were hurting us. Right. Josh Pate was saying on Late Kick that, in the spring, people around the Alabama program thought Ty Simpson would win the job in spring, but he could never take hold of it because he turned the ball over too much. Mm-hmm. Jalen Milroe in the A&M game last year, the reason that game was so close is he turned the football over. He made plays that almost beat us rather than, you got to make those plays that don't beat us before you can make the plays that do do win us the game. So I think that's going to be the focus. I think the guy that's going to win the job is, number one, who can win the team, and number two, who makes the plays that don't lose us games. Mm-hmm. Because the weapons are there. The offensive line should be improved. The running backs are really good. The receivers are up and coming, but you can't have plays that cost you games and cost your team possessions and put you in a disadvantage. But we appreciate everybody tuning in. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel. It's our second ever video on YouTube. And please, we encourage you to leave comments on the video. Tell us what you want to hear from us. Just your general thoughts on what we're talking about in our videos.
Ask us questions. We'll do our best to answer them. Absolutely.
Yes. We want as much feedback as possible. At Saturdays _SEC on Twitter. Feel free to message us or comment us at any time. We're active on Twitter. We get even more active as the season approaches. So, but yeah, please like the video, subscribe, and we really appreciate all your support. So thank you guys for tuning in. And we'll see you next week for week 3 of our preview series.
Thank you, guys.